Welcome to your daily news deep dive. We're going to unpack some pretty significant environmental and political news stories today. A lot of them hitting close to home here in California.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how these stories,
Yeah,
seemingly separate on the surface, all tie back to this larger narrative of climate change and resource management.
absolutely. Let's start with this LA Times article about California's deep aquifers. We had all that rain in 2023.
Right.
You'd think we'd be swimming in water by now,
Yeah.
but these deep reserves are still struggling.
Yeah, the situation is more complex than it appears on the surface.
Okay,
The heavy rains did replenish surface water, which is fantastic.
right,
But those deeper aquifers, the ones we really rely on for that long-term sustainability,
right.
they didn't fully recover. It's like trying to fill a bathtub with a dripping faucet.
And to make matters even more challenging, the LA Times also points out how California's rainy season is kind of out of sync with most of the U.S.
Uh-huh.
We get most of our rain in the winter,
Right.
not the spring like a lot of other places, and that really complicates our water management strategies.
Yeah, that unusual timing, makes it harder to capture and store that precious rainwater.
For sure. This brings us to another concerning story from the LA Times. After the Eaton Palisades fires, the Army Corps of Engineers decided to skip soil testing in the burn areas. If those deep aquifers are already stressed, shouldn't we be extra cautious about potential contamination?
Yeah, that's a valid point. I mean, the daily climate brings up a good precedent here.
Yeah.
The campfire, remember that one?
Oh, yeah.
Where dangerous levels of toxins were found even after the initial cleanup.
Right.
So is this a case of the Army Corps cutting corners, or are there other factors at play? It's a question residents deserve an answer to.
Absolutely, especially when you consider those other LA Times stories about Altadena and Pacific Palisades.
Right.
Both communities are still grappling with restoring their drinking water after contamination.
It's tough. Imagine having to repressurize and flush an entire water system to make the water safe again.
It's a massive undertaking for sure.
Yeah, and it highlights how fragile our water infrastructure can be.
And how crucial it is to prevent that contamination in the first place.
Absolutely.
Speaking of water woes, there's this House Republican highlighted in the Daily Climate who's trying to block the EPA's new lead in drinking water rule.
Yeah, this move speaks to the larger political battle surrounding environmental regulations.
For sure.
On one hand, you have those advocating for stricter rules to protect public health and the environment.
Right.
On the other hand, you have those who argue that these regulations are too burdensome, they stifle economic growth and overreach the EPA's authority.
Yeah, the LA Times throws more fuel on that fire with an article criticizing the Trump administration's policies, claiming they're actually slowing down fire prevention work. They specifically call out the whole raking the forest idea.
It's ironic, isn't it? The very policies intended to reduce wildfire risk are being accused of hindering those efforts.
Right.
Makes you wonder, are these policies truly effective, or are they more about political posturing?
And then we have Climate Change Dispatch praising Trump's energy plan, claiming it could be the key to fixing our fragile power grid.
This back and forth really highlights the polarized nature of the climate debate.
Yeah,
We see opposing viewpoints, often with strong political undercurrents,
right.
which makes it really challenging to discern what's truly best for the environment and the public.
Absolutely. And while these political battles rage on, California is considering a new bill, reported by the LA Times, that would require statewide wastewater monitoring. Seems everyone wants to keep tabs on what we're flushing down the drain these days.
Well, wastewater can tell us a lot about a community's health.
Oh, yeah.
It's like a canary in a coal mine, revealing everything from disease outbreaks to drug use and even the presence of industrial pollutants.
This connects to those daily climate articles about Texas. They've declared a state of emergency over toxic fertilizer contaminated with forever chemicals, all stemming from sewage sludge. And on top of that, the EPA might be dropping climate pollution rules, which could create even more environmental headaches down the line.
Yeah, those forever chemicals, or PFAS as they're known,
Right.
they're a serious concern. They don't break down in the environment and can accumulate in our bodies, potentially leading to various health issues.
It's a prime example of how seemingly isolated events can have far-reaching consequences.
Absolutely.
It's a stark reminder that we can't just flush our problems away and expect them to disappear.
Nope, what we do here in California can impact communities in Texas and vice versa.
Exactly. It underscores the need for a more holistic approach to environmental management, one that acknowledges the interconnectedness of our actions and their potential ripple effects.
For sure. Now, let's shift gears and look at what the Trump administration is doing on a national level.
The Daily Climate paints a pretty intense picture of their efforts. They're trying to reclaim billions in Biden-era climate funding,
Yeah.
potentially shutting down U.S. aid, and they've even nominated someone from the oil industry to oversee public land drilling.
These actions signal a significant shift in priorities, moving away from international aid and climate change mitigation
Right.
towards a more fossil fuel-centric agenda.
And it's not just about policy changes. The Daily Climate also mentions this secretly recorded video of an EPA official
Oh, wow.
describing attempts to quickly distribute funds before the Trump administration could block them.
This adds a layer of urgency to the situation,
Yeah,
and perhaps even a hint of desperation.
right.
It suggests that even within the EPA, there's a sense that these climate initiatives are under threat.
It's like a race against time to get these funds out the door and into the hands of the people who need them. But while all this political maneuvering is going on, scientists are scrambling to preserve federal health data.
Oh, really?
According to the Daily Climate, the Trump administration is removing online access to key databases.
This raises concerns about transparency and potential data loss.
Absolutely.
As the Conversation article highlights, this could have serious implications for our ability to respond to public health threats.
Like,
Avian flu.
Right.
Without access to this, data scientists are essentially flying blind.
it's a disturbing thought. But amidst all this turmoil, there's a glimmer of hope.
Okay.
The Daily Climate reports that clean energy installations in the U.S. hit record numbers last year.
It's encouraging to see solar, wind, and battery storage surging ahead, even with the political headwinds.
Yeah.
It demonstrates a growing momentum in the clean energy sector, driven by falling costs, technological advancements,
Right.
and a growing public awareness of the climate crisis.
Solar power in particular is booming, with installations growing by a staggering 65% from the previous year.
That's huge. This speaks to the increasing affordability and accessibility of solar energy,
For sure.
making it a viable option for more and more households and businesses.
But the Daily Climate also cautions that wind power is facing some challenges.
Yeah, rising costs, supply chain disruptions, and local opposition, especially for offshore wind projects, are slowing down its progress. This highlights the complexities of transitioning to a clean energy future.
Right.
It's not just about technological innovation.
Yeah.
It's about navigating economic, political, and social hurdles.
We also need to consider the social and environmental impacts of our energy choices, ensuring that communities benefit from these projects
Right.
and that natural habitats are protected.
Speaking of unintended consequences, let's circle back to that alarming story from the Daily Climate about Texas declaring a state of emergency over toxic fertilizer.
This situation, with a county grappling with contaminated sewage sludge and those forever chemicals,
Right.
brings the issue of environmental pollution right to our doorstep.
These PFAS chemicals are incredibly persistent in the environment.
Yeah.
They can leach into our water supplies, contaminate our food chain, and pose a serious threat to human health.
It's a stark reminder that what we do with our waste matters. We can't simply ignore the problem and hope it goes away.
This situation also raises questions about the safety regulations surrounding sewage sludge
For sure.
and the potential risks associated with its use as fertilizer.
And it makes you wonder what other potential environmental time bombs are ticking away beneath the surface.
This brings us to the international news, where we see how global events can have local impacts.
The NPR story about the Panama Canal's water woes really stood out to me. They're planning to dam a major river
Wow.
to ensure there's enough water to keep the canal operating. But this would displace thousands of indigenous people,
Oh, no.
upending their lives and traditions.
It's a classic example of the difficult choices we face as we grapple with climate change and resource scarcity.
Yeah.
In this case, the need to maintain a vital shipping route is pitted against the rights and livelihoods of indigenous communities.
It's heartbreaking to see how people who have lived in harmony with nature for generations
Right.
are being forced to bear the brunt of our global environmental challenges.
It underscores the need for equitable solutions that consider the needs of all stakeholders,
Absolutely.
especially those most vulnerable to climate change impacts.
And speaking of vulnerable communities, the Climate Home News article about rising heat impacting cocoa production in West Africa highlights the far-reaching consequences of a warming planet.
It's a reminder that climate change isn't just an environmental issue.
Right.
It's an economic and social justice issue as well.
For sure.
As temperatures rise, cocoa yields are declining, pushing up the price of chocolate
Yeah.
and impacting the livelihoods of millions of farmers in West Africa.
So that Valentine's Day chocolate might have been a bit pricier this year,
Probably.
and it's likely to become even more expensive in the future.
This situation highlights the interconnectedness of our global food systems
Right?
and how climate change can disrupt supply chains and impact consumers worldwide.
Finally, let's talk about that BRC Green Corridor project that Climate Home News covered. They're creating the world's largest protected area, which sounds fantastic on the surface. But here's the catch: they're doing it without consulting the indigenous communities who live there.
It's a prime example of how even well-intentioned conservation efforts can have negative consequences if they fail to consider the rights and perspectives of those local communities.
It's ironic that a project aimed at protecting nature could end up disenfranchising the very people who have been its stewards for generations.
It really highlights the importance of incorporating indigenous knowledge and perspectives into environmental decision-making.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot of ground today, from local water issues to global climate impacts and political power plays. What are your key takeaways?
I think the news today really underscores how interconnected our world truly is.
Yeah,
Environmental challenges don't respect borders, and the choices we make here
right.
can have ripple effects across the globe.
It's also clear that we're at a crossroads.
Yeah.
When it comes to climate change and environmental policy,
Uh-huh.
the actions we take now will have a profound impact on the future.
But amidst all the challenges,
Right.
there are also reasons for hope.
Yeah, I agree.
We see communities mobilizing to demand action, and the clean energy sector is experiencing remarkable growth.
It's a reminder that we have the power to make a difference both individually and collectively. So what can our listeners do to stay informed and engaged?
Well, first, stay curious. Keep learning about these issues and how they affect you and your community.
Right.
Support organizations working on the front lines of environmental protection and climate action.
Make conscious choices in your daily life, from reducing your carbon footprint to supporting sustainable businesses.
And most importantly, use your voice, speak up for the environment, and hold our leaders accountable for their actions.
Well, that's our deep dive into today's news. We hope you found it insightful and empowering. Remember, knowledge is power, and together we can create a more sustainable future.
Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep asking those tough questions.